Our closing keynote, Kat Taylor. Kat is a social and environmental activist, advocate. She's CEO and co-founder of Beneficial State Bank with her activist spouse, Tom Steyer. How many of you heard Tom speak last year? Kind of killed, didn't he? Yeah, decent speech. It was all right. I mean, we're going to do better probably tonight. So, but Beneficial State Bank invests in local community and for social benefit. And Kat is this rare combination of banker farmer. Not many of those around, but she does both with great flair and great effect. She and Tom own Tomcat Ranch in Pescadero, right? Yep. It's an experimental farm. If any of you have been down there, developing, teaching next generation regenerative farming practices. But Beneficial State Bank is also inspiring, at least to me. It harkens back to these great social, responsible banks and credit unions mandated to produce meaningful and social justice, environmental benefits. And, you know, we had Tom give the keynote last year. We've got Kat this year, and I've asked Kat to get me in touch with her 4 sons for next year. She hasn't quite committed to that yet. But we're so pleased to have you, Kat, and thanks so much for taking the time. Please welcome Kat Taylor.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to put more than 2,000 pounds of beans in our upcycled bag today. Forgive me if I speak really quickly. First, thank you for letting me represent Beneficial State Bank that's bringing beneficial banking to the economy, and Tomcat Ranch, a learning laboratory for regenerative agriculture. And may I just acknowledge my colleagues in the room, because I travel in the best company. So if you'd raise your hand if you're affiliated with either. There we go. All right. In the movement to secure equity and community resiliency, banking and agriculture truly matter, and Marin is a potential wellspring of both. And just to note, I always hope that others who are experiencing the real and psychological effects of an unjust economy have their turn at the podium, so I'll use mine as judiciously as I can and to channel their voices. So, any parent running a household would engage in planning for the future, taking into account the past. Tragically, our origins in the U.S. include slavery, Jim Crow, lynchings, mass incarceration, state killings, Native genocide, immigrant refugee and farm worker persecution, and less than full personhood for at least half of the population. We can't expect that legacy not to carry forward with us. As warned in Winners Take All, we can't just go forward without regard to who did what to whom, nor should we put the arsonists in charge of the fire department. With every sector of the economy failing us on justice, climate, and social order, we seek nothing less than a new economy that should be as fully inclusive, racially and gender just, and environmentally restorative as possible. I start by also recognizing that the development paradigm in America has been fraught with racism, divestment, displacement, and gross inequities. Consider the story of Portland as portrayed in the paper Bleeding Albina, because it is the story of virtually every community in America, including close by Marin City, which was the site of the Bechtel shipyards. After Pearl Harbor, FDR commanded all communities to accept the shipbuilders necessary to mount a full-blown war effort. This call set off a mass African-American migration to port cities, including Portland and Marin City. Oregon, having a particularly racist history, though not that far from our own in California, fomented during the Civil War, those city fathers pushed all the newcomers to an area called Vanport, where 40,000 people of color and low socioeconomic means lived miraculously in the largest public housing project ever. Unfortunately, the political leadership knew that the levees holding back Three Rivers, this is going to sound familiar, from that magnificent community were unsound. And several years into its making, the levees broke and water wiped every trace of those 40,000 person civilization away in 45 minutes. Those same folks rebuilt in the Albina district that was then redlined by the banks and segregated by real estate, such that no one black lived outside the Albina district and no one white lived inside. Nonetheless, and once again, residents built a beautiful community, but without investment, the tax base eroded, services like public safety and education went unfunded, and the powers that be used redevelopment and eminent domain to steal property from the black community, setting off yet another diaspora. It turns out societally imposed disasters are even worse than natural ones, and that story is not unlike what happened to Marin City in the end as well. But these massive systems, from real estate, including housing, to banking, to energy, to food, having been born in design, are susceptible to redesign. Additionally, they overlap and interconnect, and to not take a holistic approach underestimates the problem set and therefore the opportunity set. In fact, our opportunities can receive a step change boost from large shifts if we only are honest, dream big enough, and capitalize on them in time. We must never separate social justice from environmental well-being. They are flip sides of the same coin. And after all, the way we have prosecuted our natural resource agenda typically has led to deep and enduring structural injustice, from the Roman Empire to the slave economy and native genocide to global diasporas of immigrants and refugees that are happening even now in the face of climate change. So let's move from the taking economy to the nature of economies. Consider, for instance, the opportunity of dismantling an industrial agricultural system that is increasingly being exposed for its many false paradigms, from its labor model to the saturation of chemical toxins to its dispersion of empty and damaging calories. Let's do that in favor of a mid-scale, efficient, no-till stewardship of healthy soils, and therefore higher and more resilient yields, increased biodiversity, better quality and quantity of water, and restored economic viability for the whole supply chain, including the land managers. That's what we're attempting at Tomcat Ranch, operating on a 1,900-acre working cattle ranch 51 miles south of San Francisco. Located in the food shed of 3 metropolitan markets and a hotbed of food system thought leadership, including Ed Stempel and Marin Carbon Project, we are here to report what's going on and more importantly, under the ground to change the food system for good. In 2006, we began a holistic climate campaign incorporating agriculture because it's the dominant way that we tend the planet. Surely we must reduce emissions, but we also need to quickly resequester carbon to draw it down from the air, keep it out of the oceans, and put it back into the soil where it can do nothing but good. In fact, our producing lands were comprised of 11% carbon, but are now reduced to just 1.5% on average. The rest is in the oceans and the air. And we need that soil carbon back. The flip side of that same coin, the social justice piece of environmental well-being, means that we should not divide ourselves and conquer each other by pursuing maximization strategies. That's a one against the many tactic, and it has brought us to the brink of species collapse. Instead, we should now pursue a many for the all strategy and optimize for multiple benefits that redound to all in a multi-stakeholder model. These benefits are public goods, and they include biodiversity, water quality and quantity, human health, animal welfare, economically resilient livelihoods, healthy food, and especially for our focus on the ranch, climate stability. At its heart, regenerative ranching respects the carbon cycle, whereby plants, through photosynthesis, and ungulate animals, through rapid light grazing, convert solar energy to plant biomass and muscle mass in the animal. Even if humans don't consume meat, and I never advocate as a 12-year vegetarian that they need to, Those ungulate animals are necessary players in the carbon cycle symphony. Using carbon as their currency, plants give themselves up as feed to the animals. They then rebuild their plant mass by exchanging carbon along the mycorrhizal highways with the soil community below to get the nutrients and minerals the plants need to grow back. Those nutrients and minerals are facilitated by the animals' manure, urine, and stomping. In this process, durable soil carbon is created that stays in the soil beyond what leaves through transevaporation and plant growth. The crystalline soil structure that results also allows water to linger, keeping otherwise runoff carbon out of the oceans. The net result is healthier ecosystems, higher forage yields, and rapid resequestration of soil carbon into durable carbon for immediate climate benefit. Tomcat Ranch intercedes in the food supply chain and uses our unique superpowers to effect beneficial change. We sell healthy, climate-smart product through farmers markets and online, creating climate-smart food evangelicals. We partner with chefs and restaurants with shamanistic suasion. And we look to use that influence to migrate 1 million acres in California to regenerative ranching by 2022. That's our climate commitment to COP24. And in partnership with the Center for Eco-Literacy and the California Thursdays statewide program, we will ensure that every public school child has the most healthy and empowering foods California producers can possibly offer, shifting the supply chain towards regenerative agriculture in the process. Superpower number one is our ability to experiment with and de-risk adoption of regenerative practices, both ancient and newly innovated, because we are not dependent upon the operations for our livelihood. We can be a learning laboratory without that risk. We also have the resources to partner with Point Blue Conservation Sciences for advanced ecological monitoring. The management regime that optimizes the carbon cycle and gains the climate co-benefits uses ranch-wide planning, ecological monitoring, multi-species grazing and impact, mandatory rest and recovery periods of fields, biodiversity stewardship, all leading to the building of healthy soils and climate benefits. The results of our learning laboratory so far include the return just 3 years into regenerative grazing regimes of perennial grasses with their much longer roots and ability to sequester durable soil carbon to all 72 managed paddocks from just 3 at the start. What we might predict in future climate benefit, we draw from our TIM modeling, that stands for Total Impact Measurement and Management. TIM monetizes based on only real market exchanges, the co-benefits and the costs of operations at Tomcat Ranch today, in 5 years' time, and against a counterfactual based on the most conservative rendition of a confined animal factory operation. To date, regenerative ranching is beating that counterfactual by over $7 a pound. Superpower number 2 is to use our networks among big buyers to shift the food supply chain in favor of regenerative production and affordable access to good food. As I mentioned, in partnership with the Center for Eco-Literacy, California procured climate-smart food is now in school districts representing 1/3 of the billion school meals served annually in California. The California Climate Challenge, announced just recently by Beneficial State Foundation and the Cal State campuses, will align California's considerable spending power with climate-smart food and other goods and services. Superpower number 3 is our convening power to share science-based best practices, data, and results through up to 100 on-site ranch events each year, other sector convenings, and myriad network events. I invite you all to join us online, on the ranch, at the farmers market, in the halls of government, or simply at your dining table. In the end, I believe there is no basis for land ownership other than stewardship. Well-stewarded land produces benefits for all and harm to none. And she or he who stewards well should have our greatest cultural respect. Like the traditional peoples who managed to live for thousands of years without depleting their home, we must learn to support our soils even as we feed the masses. And we need not be Luddites to respect nature, nor are 9 billion people a liability. Rather, they are an asset in this quest because many heads are better than one. Already, millions of them crowdsourced a natural answer to our fertilizer dilemma when they joined Foldit, a gaming platform, to discover how maize, the kind of corn that humans can actually eat, can fix its own nitrogen from the raw ingredients in the soil that are, by their very nature, sustainable. This is the modern alchemy we need to find. In planning for the new economy, we should take account of where current capital assets, transportation and grid infrastructure, and job bases of people are located, and how they all might be redeployed in service of a renewable economy. Could we map these extant resources and overlay the needs of renewable activities like solar, wind, clean textile, exemplary forestry, automation and artificial intelligence, big data, design, build, mass wood, etc.? A simple exercise reflecting merely mining assets, as almost no mining is renewable, and the highest rated solar territory in Los Angeles County suggests we might find some pretty complete, if not total, overlaps. In the overlap lies our promise, and we will protect against anyone being left out of that transition. We will map those waxing and waning industries. We will seek the overlap of information, new transportation, artificial intelligence, and sustainable resource development with those extractive, non-sustainable industries that we must leave behind, and everyone's coming on the journey. There are numerous examples countrywide of societal assaults on communities that amount to disasters for which there is no prevention, insurance, or recovery funds, beyond even Portland's Albina district, Katrina, or even Puerto Rico. There is still persistent and deleterious racial and ethnic discrimination, likely gender too, in mortgage and home equity lending as well, which was shown by a reveal study of 31 million mortgage applications. In addition, half of Americans do not have $400 to handle an emergency. So the mandate needs also to be that we provide fair financing, especially for communities of color, as a priority of any planning process. More broadly, we need all to get at the root causes of continuing injustice and corruption in our midst. At Beneficial State Bank and Foundation, our goal is to change the banking system for good, because nothing less will suffice. It will not be enough to be a good bank in a bad system. We believe we have to get the fundamental institutions of society right, especially banking, business, and the economy, because they are choosing everything else for us, even government, whether we recognize it or not. No amount of philanthropic or government resources can mitigate for the harm wrought by selfish corporate behavior, because that tail will not wag that dog. Throw in that most governmental funds and philanthropic endowments are conventionally invested in the very causes of harm to society, and you have a real conundrum only addressable at the root economic cause. Capital has been beating up on labor for centuries now, and labor is, well, just people. As a result, $1 has grown to $20 in the stock market since 1980, but wages have remained stagnant. And ALICEs, which stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained but Employed People, constitute 33% of most communities. The asset disparity is actually worse even than the income disparity because capital equates to power. And those who have the power to change the status quo rarely do, because that status quo is the basis of their power. So as capital aggrandizes more of the spoils of war, it will grow increasingly difficult to make it heal, to discipline corporations in the public interest, and therefore to snatch our species' chestnut out of this fire. We must discipline and distribute capital, beginning with banking. Across the economy, it's critical that we align our business activities with our values by hard-coded design, not by altruism or choice. And equity, not equality, is what we are after. We in the boomer generation have not done much to improve, and in fact have made the climate, the income and wealth gap, and political participation based on confidence and representation much worse. But we also have the stoicism and generosity of all those peoples sidelined until now by bigotry and greed in our favor as we fashion a world that is the best place to live and work for all. Our future, governed by hyperlocal accountability and global connection, is full of promise. We will do better together than we can apart, but we must put more and different people in charge right now. And that means people of color, people covering the gender spectrums, and new generations like the millennials and Gen Zers. Everyone has agency, that's choice, and accountability, that's responsibility, over where their money sleeps at night. There are 4 areas of banking that we should care about at all times and all together. First, governance should be allegiant to multiple stakeholders, not just the equity shareholder. Beneficial State Bank serves our customers, colleagues, the communities in which we operate, the planet upon which we all depend, and the public interest at large. In fact, as a quasi-public system, banking owes society many duties, including fair lending, anti-money laundering, customer privacy, and cybersecurity. The mission of every bank should be, in the ideal, to create benefit for all and harm to none. And the ownership really matters. So 100% of the economic rights of Beneficial State Bank belong to a public charity nonprofit called Beneficial State Foundation, which is permanently governed in the public interest. And at the end of the day, when profits are distributed, they can only be invested in the low-resource communities we serve or the environment upon which we all depend by mandate of the Beneficial State Foundation's bylaws. That's virtuous profit-taking. That's beneficial ownership. Second, on the asset side of every bank's balance sheet are the investment securities and the loan or credit portfolio. Really, lending is the most influential activity of any bank. We think of banking as the first and most powerful form of crowdfunding. And it's not that a specific deposit funds a specific loan, but all deposits fund a lending practice. So that practice really matters. And if it is not realizing your values, or even more likely if it is undermining them, then it has to go. Banking is also super influential in the main economy because we pool our idle cash, called deposits, in order to finance the future in which we wish to live. And then we hypercharge those deposits with low cost since they are protected by government-backed insurance, and lots of leverage since we can join every dollar of equity in a bank with at least $9 of deposits, creating $10 effect in every loan. Moreover, what we lend continues to keep producing whatever it finances. And if that's good, that's very, very good. But if that is bad, that is very, very, very bad. At Beneficial State Bank, we insist that 75% of our loan dollars are in the hands of borrowers producing a new economy, that one I described before. We judge if that is true, if the loans are producing something we all desperately need, like affordable housing or renewable energy, or if the borrowers themselves are also governed in the public interest, like B corporations or worker co-ops, or if the loans are prioritizing services to low-resource communities and communities of color because their voices have simply been left out of the economy for too long, and that is why the economy is not serving us in any way now. And since we have a focus on housing, I note that most housing is provided by the private markets, and we have to get those right too. In the same period that the city of San Francisco added a net of 100 units of affordable housing each of 3 years, Beneficial State Bank, a relatively small bank, was able to finance to affordability 4,600 units. This is the critical insight. It's much more important that banks refrain from lending to and investing in pernicious activities than that they engage in pro-social or pro-environmental behaviors. In the last 10 years, the biggest banks in the system lent $250 billion just to coal, when that industry has largely declared bankruptcy and already shifted its pension liabilities onto the American taxpayer, while it accelerates climate disaster. At the recent Global Climate Action Summit, we should have insisted that the biggest banks first stop their devastating support of fossil fuels before they parade around their meager commitments to what is already a profitable activity called renewable energy finance. Even billions of dollars of renewable energy finance cannot overcome the bank's continued complicity in climate disaster. That's not a real commitment, and we should not accept it. Third, on the liability side of every bank's balance sheet are the depositors and the products that they use. We insist that mission live at the heart of each product such that a customer is healthier the day after they take up a banking service than they were the day before. This is not the norm in the banking industry. This means that we process, for instance, checks from smallest to largest to avoid repeat overdrafts, and we notify customers by phone, not by snail mail through Denver, as soon as possible to correct an overdraft and avoid the associated fees, which in any event should be reasonable and capped. In contrast, when Washington Mutual offered so-called free checking, it cost each customer on average $500 per year in overdraft fees. Such usurious products should be banished from bank offerings, and business licenses should be revoked for continued consumer abuses. Fourth and finally, we should demand radical transparency and fairness in every other corporate practice of the banks. When 1/3 of bank tellers are on some form of public assistance, which represents an obscene shifting of private cost to public responsibility by the most profitable corporations in the world, we allow banks to contribute to the vast underpayment of American workers. In an echo, 1 in 3 Americans now work full-time, yet still meet the federal definition of poverty, with 1 in 2 expected to do the same by 2020. This unsustainable bargain stems from the erosion of organizing power and threatens to undermine the very viability of the economy and the society it creates. At Beneficial State Bank, we pay people to live, not just to work. At 150% of living wage, fully benefited according to the MIT living wage calculator. We also measure our greenhouse gas, landfill, and water footprint and drive each down per FTE each year. And it's high time we expected no less than these sorts of commitments from the biggest banks in the system. Which brings me to people power. We have it. It's massive. It's becoming coordinated and connected thanks to the internet. And we have yet to use but a tiny fraction of it. Consider this. What is the internet without us? Nothing. The internet gets its power from what is called a network effect, whereby every new member who joins increases the value for all other members. Think the telephone, the internet, etc. That's our power of creation. It's participation. And network effects are self-fulfilling until they are not. The network effect deteriorates as people leave or even threaten to leave. That's our power of defection. Both are people power, participation and defection. To date, we have let our power flee us to roost in the largest corporations in the world, to the capital markets that narcissistically recreate themselves every day, and to the co-opted agents of representative democracy who show more allegiance to the corporations that feed them than to us people who elect them. But we can and will take back our power, and not just by blunt defection. If we have that much power over the internet, why do we not each have a micro share of ownership in it too? And why can't we use the return off that ownership to make sure our expenses are covered as collateral for home ownership or college expenses, as our retirement nest egg? That's the power of finance. And now we have blockchain to efficiently and verifiably create, track, and enforce those micro rights. You might wonder why on earth would the likes of Facebook, Google, Amazon, and others give up their shares of equity? Well, there is such a thing as not a bigger yacht. And if you look at the power of defection after the Cambridge Analytics debacle, it inspired those great corporations to buy resilient alternative networks called WhatsApp and Instagram. Banking itself benefits from a network effect aided by FDIC insurance. Imagine if all depositors in banks received a micro share for their participation and therefore brought out beneficial ownership in all banks. The quasi-public nature of banking has given rise over 375 years to the instinct that public banks could help us achieve equity and environmental well-being. In particular, public banking could be a catalyst for large infrastructure projects, including broadband, community-scale renewable energy, downstreaming capital to community banks that still lend to small business where the lion's share of jobs are created, and potentially the banking of cannabis to curb the evils through no fault of cannabis itself, yet invited into an all-cash industry. The humble municipal bond could complement public banks to finance affordable housing, broadband, pollution mitigation, open space, small business incubators. We might also help municipalities stand up their own banks, perhaps rolling up to a strong balance sheet and the backing of their state or region, so that public banks might one day dot our landscape nationally. A federation of state banks could ensure that all of these activities realize the resiliency born of diversification, liquidity, and public purpose. Of course, we always encourage all people to move their money in alignment with their values, but we also join the masses in support of or in opposition to major societal issues of the day, especially in any way that shifts this country back to a democracy by people instead of by dollars. We will increase the constituencies in favor of these shifts, even if only out of enlightened self-interest. We're busily preparing a book of standards, a playbook, if you will, for the larger banks in the system. We know we can't change the banking system on our own. We rely on intermediaries to do that. But out of pure enlightened self-interest, some of those regional banks will take up our behaviors and commitments in order to steal market share off the biggest banks in the system that are locked in place like the dinosaurs. Everyone knew that David would beat Goliath, and everyone is watching the regional banks to see what they will do. And most hearteningly, recently, Bank of the West declared that it would divest from fossil fuels and pay its workers at least $15 an hour. Along the way, we will presume that coal miners and coal country will be the beneficiaries of the living wage and safer work of mass wood timber mill jobs, engineering and architecture firms, and other information services. An overlap map reminds us that our development paradigm should always be based on equity, and we will leave no one behind. And we must never, ever separate environmental well-being from social justice. I am a naive, and I believe that the problematic past is not our prologue. I actually believe we can change banking for good. There is healing power in a story told right and with permission. There is justice in acknowledging and correcting historical oppression. There are lessons for all American communities. These are the promises of a fully networked world where equity is at the heart of every development paradigm. It's a beautiful future, much like the perspicacious women and minority-owned businesses that survived an all-out societal assault in Portland and Marin City to thrive and build something beautiful too. It really breaks my heart to see a dear old friend go down in that worn-out place again. Do you know the sound of a closing door? Have you heard that sound somewhere before? Do you wonder if she knows you anymore? I wrapped your love around me like a chain, but I never was afraid that it would die. You can dance in a hurricane, but only if you're standing in the eye. Where did you learn to walk? Where did you learn to run away from everything you love? Did you think the bottle would ever ease your pain? Did you think that love's a foolish game? Did you find someone else to take the blame? I wrapped your love around me like a chain, but I never was afraid that it would die. You can dance in a hurricane, but only if you're standing in the eye. I am a sturdy soul, and there ain't no shame in lying down in the bed you've made? Can you fight the urge to run for another day? You might make it further if you learn to stay. I wrapped your love around me like a chain, but I never was afraid that it would die. You can't dance in a hurricane, but only if you're standing in the eye. You can dance in a hurricane, but only if you're standing in the eye. Thank you.